Nobody wakes up in the morning and goes, man, you know what? Next week I really want to become homeless. And nobody says, when I grow up, I'm going to become a substance abuser. That's my goal in life. When I grow up, I'm going to have depression. Or I'm going to have bipolar disorder when I grow up. Like, these aren't things that people are wishing, hoping, and dreaming for. They're things that just happen. On any given day in the United States, around 600,000 people are experiencing homelessness. People experiencing homelessness endure many hardships, which include poverty, extreme vulnerability, violence, and the absence of appropriate medical treatment. Often those with the most severe mental illness, substance abuse disorders, and other health concerns are most impacted. Due to daily survival needs, gaining access to many of the resources necessary to establish housing is unattainable. And housing is a basic human right, according to Article 25 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The stigma of homelessness may be the most damaging to those experiencing homelessness and mental illness. This stigmatization results in being confronted with ostracism, devaluation, violence, discrimination, and social rejection. These are all factors that create barriers in exiting from homelessness. It is time to break the barriers and acknowledge our brothers and sisters who are suffering and to become activists in reform. It's time to stop looking away. To help share this story, a number of activists for the homeless will shed light on the issues, give personal anecdotes, and encourage compassion. Another young man who is currently living on the streets of San Francisco will share his unique and telling experience. Dr. Michael Connor is a prolific lecturer, has authored numerous publications, conducts workshops, and is active with a variety of community programs, including College Bound, the Orange County 100 Black Men's Passport Program in Southern California, and Positive Minds in Oakland. He has a long history of involvement in relating to issues of cultural diversity, the impact of sport athletics on the community, leadership training, and parenting with a specific focus on Black fathers. Currently, Dr. Connor is a professor at the California School of Professional Psychology, San Francisco campus.
So I'm Theon Johnson III and have the privilege of serving alongside the pastoral team of Glide Memorial United Methodist Church. Glide, as it's affectionately known by many members of the community, is a movement of people, everyday people, that has been serving the community in its current iteration since the mid-1960s. But the community itself happens to be much older. The spiritual movement has been around for about 80 years, connected to the Methodist movement.
I'm the program manager for the Envision Shelter Network. This is permanent supportive housing called the Van Dome. We house 16 chronically homeless people. These are people that were located in downtown San Mateo by our homeless outreach team, which is a consortium of other players that are interested in homelessness in this area.
I'm Shona Baum. I'm in LCSW. I'm the director of programs at the Homeless Prenatal Program, which is a really big social service here in the city. And we serve low-income families. It's anyone who has children. We do a lot of housing assistance, so we see a lot of people who are homeless, in danger of being homeless, were homeless and are just kind of barely holding on now. And we provide food assistance, we provide, do applications for rental assistance, and then we also have this wellness program on our third floor where we have classes. We have acupuncture, we have yoga, we have prenatal yoga and like mommy baby yoga.
Homelessness in the United States has a long history, which is most often coupled with trauma, discrimination, racism, classism, mental illness, and poverty. In the U.S., homelessness has roots beginning with colonialism and the displacement and near destruction of the indigenous people's population and culture. The death of roughly 90% of the Native American population through disease, violence, destruction of resources, and forceful relocation created a precedent in the United States of discrimination and otherness. Roughly 500,000 Africans were sold into slavery in the U.S. from 1525 to 1866. Around 9 million African Americans were enslaved at some point in United States history. This granted the slave owner or master all rights over the slave. Normalization of white supremacy was used to justify slavery. Masters bought and sold slaves, split up their families, chained and restrained slaves, brutally beat and maimed slaves, and worked them extreme hours. Some were murdered and raped without consequence. After December 18, 1865, when the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, the Reconstruction period began. Ending slavery did not ensure African American rights or citizenship. According to the Tuskegee Institute's newspaper records, it suggested that between 1882 and 1951, roughly 5,000 Black Americans were lynched for crimes ranging from unpopularity to murder. Also during this time, incarceration was used as another tactic to engage free labor. Hundreds of thousands of African Americans were falsely imprisoned in the South for lengthy sentences or for crimes including walking next to the railroad tracks, talking loudly around white women, selling farm goods after dark, and for not having employment. Black and Indigenous people in America have been displaced, murdered, enslaved. They face ongoing racism and intergenerational trauma. These populations have a higher percentage of homelessness per capita than any other racial group. First insane asylums in the United States were modeled after those in Europe, where people experiencing mental illness were being isolated from the general community. The mentally ill were left in deplorable conditions, housed with violent criminals, chained to walls, beaten, and left with little food. French physician Philippe Pinel and partner Jean-Baptiste Poussin began a reformation of the treatment for those experiencing mental illness in France at the Bicêtre Insane Asylum in the 1790s with a new concept of moral treatment. Moral treatment was based on the idea that patients should receive personal care. The patients were cared for by staff and encouraged to take part in daily activities and lead a life as close to normal as possible. Beginning in the early 1800s, the United States asylums focused on moral treatment. This treatment was adopted partially due to the development of the Western European asylums and institutions that were small and never larger than 250 patients. Unfortunately, developers of moral treatment did not train enough individuals to continue their practice after they passed away or retired, and conditions in asylums began to deteriorate. In the mid-1800s, reformer Dorothea Dix found individuals who were being abused in asylums in Massachusetts and began fighting for more rights for those with mental illness. She presented the memorial, which included her research and findings, to the state legislature. One quote reads, "I proceed, gentlemen, briefly to call to your attention to the present state of insane persons confined within this Commonwealth, in cages, stalls, pens, chained, naked, beaten with rods, and lashed into obedience." She was successful in a number of states, but failed federally. Unfortunately, these new state hospitals became large institutions with more than 600 patients at a time, with little personal care and government oversight. Typically, they implemented the medical model approach that often emphasized psychological research and the biological aspect of the treatment rather than patient care. Insulin shock therapy, lobotomies, restraints, cold water, boiling water, and electric shock therapy were often used. Patients faced conditions that were overcrowded and underserved. In the 1950s, a new drug called Thorazine was introduced to sedate patients, so less staff was needed. Many of these state hospitals were open until the 1970s, and some are still open today.
It's probably the first thing I remember about homelessness. I grew up in rural northwestern Ohio, and I do mean country, and right behind our house was the railroad track. And I was maybe 6 or 7 at the time. I remember this stranger had come to the house, knocked on the back door, which is strange because the family always came into the front way, nobody ever knocked. And my mother was talking with this man, and the next thing I know, she's throwing some food together, and he's sitting on the step out back eating. And I asked who he was, if she knew this was a friend that you know, and she said no. And she's trying to silence me. Just what, you can ask her questions later. But I was just really curious. And when he departed, she said that was a hobo. And I said, what is a hobo? And she tried to explain to me, but it didn't kind of tie in because it was so different than anything I'd seen before. And this is me growing up poor, and it was me also having a large family, and people often come over, and as the siblings or cousins or somebody didn't have a place to stay, i.e. they were homeless, they were absorbed by the family. So my concept was quite different than what this person was about. And one of my uncles came over to talk about him, and he said basically they follow the railroad track looking for work. That these are not people who are not working. They are working, but they don't keep jobs. They would move on. And we had seasonal workers in Ohio. Most people think about seasonal workers in the Southwest, but in fact we had migratory roads that led to the farms and the harvesting, be it vegetables or fruit. And so I tied it into that. And then later on, it was probably, as I'm thinking, maybe once a year or once every other year, the same thing would happen. And as I got older, I became a little more aware, and it made a little more sense. So this was not quite the way we did it in the family, because I do remember asking, don't they have family? And my uncle said, probably, but they're on the road. And then he tied it into the Great Depression, which made no sense to me. And I'm not a city kid, so I was going and I got on Anthony Avenue, I got to State Street or whatever the street was, and instead of turning right, I turned left. And I ended up at the Fort Wayne State School, which was a program that dealt with the mentally ill in the northern half of Indiana. I got hired on the spot, so I started working immediately with a population that I found ultimately would lead to my life's work. But what happened there is that Indiana was following the Massachusetts model, quote unquote, that's what they referred to it, with the Kennedys being very involved with the legislation in Massachusetts. Pretty well known now, but it wasn't known at the time, that one of the children, one of JFK's sisters, was mentally ill, and there was some conversation whether she is retarded, mentally ill, or something else. But at any rate, the family didn't have much to do with her, as commonly what happened back then, until he got some other awareness and began to talk about mental health. So the facility where I was working was using what they called the Kennedy model, the Massachusetts model, and at that point they did house the mentally ill. We had training about what we're doing. I've got to be honest and say the training at the time was state of the art. It was not good training. I mean, for example, to learn how to work with somebody who's epileptic, you would induce a seizure. You withhold medication, have them deep breathe, etc., until the eyes would roll, they would start to seize, and then we'd talk about this is what happens and this is what you do. That was the model, that was accepted standard of training that was going on back then. Now clearly we recognize now that is not a good thing.
The social and community mental health reforms under President John F. Kennedy and President Lyndon B. Johnson in the 1960s began with the idea to reform mass institutionalized care for those experiencing mental illness. This was meant to provide better and more personalized treatment. However, there was a disconnect. Only $140 million was spent on creating community mental health centers, or CMHCs. And as state hospitals were closed, patients were released without treatment plans or housing. With around one community mental health center for every county in the United States, community facilities were not prepared to deal with the influx of patients. The Community Mental Health Act was the last legislation Kennedy signed into law before he was murdered in Dallas. President Richard Nixon had a great distrust of psychiatry and mental health care, believing it was a communist agenda. Nixon federalized supplemental security income, or SSI, which accelerated deinstitutionalization because it saved states thousands of dollars for each client institutions discharged from care. Under President Carter's administration, some leadership was developed, oversight was established, and organization between the CMHCs and state hospitals began to improve. However, the funding deficit remained. By the 1980s, President Reagan and his administration pushed for closures of most of the mental health institutions. At the same time, Reagan's economic initiatives included serious cuts of federal assistance to local governments. freezing the minimum wage at $3.35 an hour, diminishing funds for mental health treatment, and cutting the budget for public housing and Section 8 rent subsidies in half. Between the years of 1980 and 1989, the Housing and Urban Development budget was reduced from $74 billion to $19 billion. Reagan was quoted saying, "What we have found in this country, and maybe we're more aware of it now, is one problem that we've had, even in the best of times, is the people who are sleeping on the grates, the homeless, you might say, by choice." With the president supporting misconceptions about the homeless, he encouraged the dominant social group to follow his lead. In the 1950s, there were 500,000 patients in institutions in the United States. And by 2016, there were only 40,000 psychiatric beds available. This does not represent a decline in mental illness, but a displacement of those with mental illness to the streets, hospitals, and prisons. In 2012, approximately 350,000 inmates with severe mental illness were in prisons. Our history has led to the criminalization of mental illness and homelessness. Because the homeless population is transient, and often individuals and families want to remain hidden and safe, it is incredibly difficult to get an accurate count of the homeless. Recent counts point to over 500,000 homeless on any given night, and around 2 million who experience homelessness each year. It is estimated that another 7 million are living doubled up, for example, 2 families to an apartment or a bedroom, or living on a friend's couch or in a garage. There are many reasons people become homeless: a loss of a job, substance abuse issues, incarceration, eviction, abuse, relational problems, domestic violence, health issues, being a part of the foster care system, and aging out, mental health concerns, and natural disasters. The adolescent homeless population has increased due to sex trafficking and for children being disowned by their families after disclosing non-heteronormative sexual orientations. Once homeless, 90% of the women report sexual and physical violence. Homeless individuals report days without eating, harassment and violence by both the public and police, as well as discrimination by medical treatment facilities and clinics.
Obviously, you don't have a place to reside. And you know what's funny is, I don't know the technical word, but you know what I find interesting? When you wake up in the morning and you don't know where you're going to go to the bathroom. I found the energy it takes the night before and that morning to locate somewhere where you can use the facility is extremely, extremely difficult. We're used to waking up in the middle of the night, with our eyes closed, walking, relieving ourselves and going back to bed. For a homeless person, that doesn't happen. It's they have to have a bottle nearby, or they've got to walk a distance if they're in an encampment. They don't want to do it where they're sleeping, so they have to maneuver across, 10, 12, 13 feet of whatever to take care of themselves, and then trying to find that bathroom that is open 24 hours is super hard. And there's ones that open at 8 o'clock in the morning, so they have to hold it till that bathroom opens at 8 o'clock in the morning. Besides just figuring out where to go to the bathroom, staying warm is a huge issue. I don't, even though this is a wonderful area, the climate is, is very nice. We don't have winters. But try that at 4 or 5 in the morning, even though it may be 80 degrees that day. 4 or 5 in the morning, it's 52, 50. It's cold. It's really cold. Staying warm. Again, the energy it takes just to figure out how am I going to stay warm tonight and where am I going to go to the bathroom. But we all take for granted because we just call into a bed. Food's always an issue. So once you figure out how to stay warm that night, How are you going to go to the bathroom in the morning? Now where do we go eat? They all have their ways, but it's still, so the process of staying warm, going to the bathroom, finding food for that day, that's 7 hours. What do we spend on that? 20 minutes? Wake up, go to the bathroom, eat some cereal, and we're off on our day. No energy expanded at all. For a homeless person, those 3 simple things that we do in the morning takes a day. So, and then just the boredom. Okay, we fed ourselves, now what do we do? And the ones that don't turn to drugs and alcohol, it's wandering around, going to the library, reading a book. And I think they give up. You know, you have to stand in so many lines to get just these small needs, that to go think about getting a job or applying for Social Security or disability, just not going to happen. The average age in the city of San Mateo is 6. Because the homeless person in the city of San Mateo is a single mom with 2 children. So that's what a homeless person looks like in this city.
Most people, I think, who you see on the streets who are homeless have terrible histories of abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse. A lot of them also have attachment issues where, because it's cyclical. That same, person that you see in the Tenderloin or wherever, their own parents suffered and probably were not available to give them the love and the care and the stability that they needed. And so I think what you see is most of those people are really suffering, and then you're suffering, you turn to drugs or alcohol, and it's kind of like this downward spiral. There's a lot of people on the streets also have severe mental health issues, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or even just depression, that further keeps them from being able to move up and to be resilient. There's homeless children, and I remember when my children were little, they went to the San Francisco public schools, and I would go in and volunteer sometimes. And every time when you go in and volunteer in a public elementary school, there's going to be a couple of kids, who kind of run up to you, and they're trying to sit on your lap, and they're hugging you, and say, just sort of, my boys were like, hello, and maybe they'd play with you a little bit, but these really needy children, and those are the same children I sort of later on went on to realize who are living a lot of times in these environments where they're neglected and stressed out, and and a lot of those kids also, they do terribly in school because they don't sleep well at night. It's scary. There's fighting happening. A lot of the kids also, you're lucky if you have a place on the living room floor in public housing, and then you're even more lucky you're lying on the floor because there's shooting at night where a lot of these kids are living. And so they're going to school. They're hungry and they're tired, and those kids don't do well in school. So the whole thing is a cycle that gets going. Or if you're living in a car, you're not going to feel safe in a car. You're not going to sleep well. Nobody's going to be cooking you hot, nutritious food. And so it just starts kids out in a place where there's a deficit that I don't know, it's very hard to make up for.
I'm an immigrant. I've lived in San Mateo County for 50 years. Between San Bruno and Belmont, that's 10 miles on a train station. So I've been here. I was educated in this county, high school right up the road, Mills, junior college 10 miles away, and University of San Francisco. Got into the finance business, was very successful. Started my own business and became successful beyond my imagination. I was about, not even 40, and had, self-made millionaire, had properties, wonderful family, wonderful wife. Kind of the American dream, the immigrant dream. And unfortunately, I'm an alcoholic. I probably was since my first drink at 18. So that monkey was kind of always on my back. And it's a progressive illness. Kind of the more money I made, the more time, and then not only was it alcohol, I could afford cocaine. And so I actually lost my business because of cocaine. And it's, I kind of went from having, once the problem started becoming big, it was like, how am I going to pay for my business and all these mortgages? So all of a sudden I'm going, how am I going to pay rent? Then all of a sudden it was like, how am I going to pay a motel bill? And that progression from a beautiful home on the hills to an apartment to a motel goes fast. Next thing you know, I'm sitting in a car with a cat, a bottle of booze. And I can't even explain how it happened, other because you're so in denial that this will change. This will change. And even when I was living in a motel, I was calling up people I'd done business with. Can you pay for my motel room for the night? They're like, you? What? Why? And I didn't want to say, well, I'm a drunk, and this is why I'm losing everything. And actually, I was almost in denial to myself that I was the root cause of this problem of my downslide was alcohol and drugs. So, one day I was sitting in front of the motel and nobody paid for it. I went, wow, I'm homeless. And I ended up with sitting in a car with Thelma the Calico Cat and a bottle of vodka, kind of wondering what happened. But I was still working. I was doing mortgage modifications out of my car, telling people how I was going to save their house while I'm sitting in a car with a cat and a bottle of booze. And one day I had a grand mal alcoholic seizure in the parking lot, and I was rushed to the hospital. And I can remember a social worker coming up to me and saying, you're going to have to go to a homeless shelter. And of course my response was, you know who I am? She said, yeah, you're a homeless drunk, and you need to go to a homeless shelter. And the fear of my conception of a homeless shelter was, I'm thinking of a big room full of sleeping bags with old men drinking and shooting up drugs. That's what was in my head. And they sent me to a homeless shelter in Redwood City called Maple Street, run by Envision Shelter Network. And I really thought, this is the end of my life. I didn't realize it was kind of the beginning of my life. These homeless people that I would walk by and ignore were becoming my friends. It was a very kind of eclectic, really cool group of people. And the funny thing is, all they wanted to do was help me.
Hi, my name is Dragon Rose. I was born in Tacoma, Washington. My father was an airborne U.S. Ranger, so we've been moving around since I was a little kid, from Tacoma, Washington, Maryland, West Virginia, Florida, New York, all over the place. Even though I didn't finish college, I paid for myself to go to college at Shepherd University in West Virginia for biochemistry and music history. I did computer-aided drafting and design classes for fun in high school. I'm a visual basic scripting pro. I've been doing programming since I was a kid. I beta tested for World of Warcraft, which may not seem like a big deal, but it's kind of like a really, really big deal. Yeah. There's only so many people that were able to test the game and say hey, this is good for other people to play. I was one of those people. A lot of people that are out here because of mental health issues. A lot of people are afraid of being inside of houses because they've been beaten or much worse usually. So a lot of people like myself, for instance, I the woman I fell in love with, she was actually murdered. So I have a long, extensive history already with clinical depression, manic depressive bipolar disorder type 2, ADHD, a whole rack of things. I'm an insomniac. So take a very, 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 very big event like that, and it doesn't have the best taste in your mouth, it'll screw with you. I lost myself for a long time. I feel bad for my family, because I fell hard into drug addiction. I overdosed over 10 times. Had to be rushed to the hospital. It's bad. There's one point when mom told me every time I hear an ambulance, I think it's you passing away. So that's that's a strong reality for a lot of people. You know, it's really crazy being able to see people that'll come here and like they're broken already when they come here. You know, and you'll actually get to see them like take steps into opening up, you know, to being more comfortable with who they are, you know, finding themselves, like, and that really is a beautiful thing to watch. Is A, it doesn't happen often, and B, like, to be a part of somebody that's willing to walk the road of enlightenment, if you will, like just being able to witness that is life changing. You know, it's very motivational. You know, it took like 6.5 years, 7 years. But like, I managed to get off of my opiate addiction, finally get my life kind of like back together. I'm 27. I managed to do it before I turned 30, so that's cool. At some point, I'd like to kind of travel back out east to where my family's at, and kind of like help them kind of like with help them with dreams that were already kind of like put in motion. It gets lonely out here. It gets scary. Like you don't know what step you're gonna take next. Like which direction you're heading in. A lot of times, from one step forward is 7 steps back. Like, a lot farther back than you'd ever think it is. And I mean, regardless of the money or even the food, you know, just stopping by to acknowledge somebody's existence can like be the make or break point that person, you know, has decided to have. And like that's on some real shit. You know, like there are people every day out here that commit suicide or have suicide attempts or relapse on drugs because like they feel alone, they feel, you know, boxed in, like they're unable to make any kind of groundwork in one direction or another. And like it gets to people. You know, there's fucking kids fucking same size as me, fucking same age as me, they get fucking pulled into a van. Like I said earlier, they get pulled into a van, like, and they might show up later that day, and like, you know, they're fucking sobbing their eyes out, like, with some horror stories, like some absolute horror stories, guy and girl. I almost feel like, thankfully, there's so many more guys than there are girls, but like, there's a huge, a huge kind of like older gentleman culture that's kind of obsessed with you know, the younger guys, especially dirty kid guys. I feel like aren't worth much, and they'll offer them like, you know, a couple $100 to like to follow them back to a hotel room or, you know, back to their car, and like they need money. It absolutely can get dangerous out here. 2 weeks ago, we lost like 7 or 8 of our brothers, our family. A couple of them were killed during a gun shooting spree. 3 of them overdosed and passed away. The tree that's behind me is actually where we held the memorial for them. I miss you, Narwhal. It was rough for a little while because my pack got stolen, my hat got stolen, my guitar got stolen, like, yeah, everything. So there was a solid week where I couldn't get a sleeping bag or find a sleeping bag. I didn't have money for a sleeping bag. I still don't have a sleeping bag. I've got this blanket right here. This blanket is given to me by the same person actually who gave me my backpack. Her name's Jack, and she's a rainbow kid. We don't like people that, you know, steal stuff. You know, we really don't. Like, and that's a common misconception. Like, I watch more people, you know, that live in a house steal in the stores that I go to than, you know, I ever would. And it's like, you know, but I'm the one that's like, you know, watched because I got patches and colorful clothing and dirty-ish. Actually took a shower today, so not that dirty. For the most part, though, I'll just find like some kind of like little, you know, cubby hole to to sleep in. You know, someplace kind of like dark and secluded. It sucks sometimes because it's pretty damn cold here. You know, I'm not from San Francisco, but this bay temperature is strange. It's very strange. During the day, it'll be 80, 85 degrees, be nice, t-shirts, and then at night, it's sub-freezing, 28 degrees, 25 degrees. It's definitely hard sometimes, you know, like, if it's late at night and, like, there are no places to close down, the only place to get water is back over here or all the way in Golden Gate Park, like all the way in there, by the playground. There's another water fountain, and like that's a long walk. I have a brother of mine who actually he's missing a leg, he's missing an appendage, and not one of the bars would let me or any of, you know, like the dirty kid ensemble just in to buy a cup of water. Like, I was offering money. I was like, dude, like, my friend needs water and he can't like go anywhere. You know, he can't walk. And I ended up having to go all the way down H Street, all the way to Golden Gate Park in the middle of the night, like pitch black, couldn't see anything, like at all. I couldn't see anything at all. Like, I'm kind of like night blind. Just to fill up a fucking gallon jug of water and walk all the way back down here. It is very, very hard and difficult to use the bathroom out here, and that's God's honest truth. There's two over here. It has one urinal and then one actual toilet. Not very clean. And then over on the very end of H Street by Golden Gate Park, there's the park bathrooms, which have been closed down for like 2 months now. There's this, we call it the space toilet, and it's just this green box that opens up, and it has like bathroom inside, and it's like self-cleaning and whatnot. Still not the cleanest, you know, it's whatever. Yeah, it's some place to go to the bathroom, and then our only other option is inside McDonald's. No, I guess you can go to Whole Foods too when it's open. But like, again, with both of those, you have to be a customer. So if you don't have money, like, you know, like, you're kind of SOL. There are times where there's like 7-10 people all waiting to go to the space toilet, you know, just in a line, and you gotta wait. There's nothing you can do, you know. I mean, like, you know, that is what it is. Like, you kind of learn to, like, adjust around that. Yes, save $1 in the morning for a sausage burrito at McDonald's. Use the bathroom. Figure something out. You know, me personally, I don't have an identification card or a license. Don't have a birth certificate. Don't have a social security card. So I'm kind of like, I can't go back into the workforce even if I wanted to. Currently, right now, I'm actually going through the city, they're lending me assistance to, try and get all of the necessary documents, to do all of that. It's definitely an intriguing lifestyle, and like, once you get a taste for it, it's very hard to not see it all the way through to the finish. You know, like, once one foot starts going in front of the other, like, it's pretty much a done deal after that. You know, like, you're gonna find, what you're looking for, good, bad, or indifferent. That's for damn sure.
I think in this life we all suffer. Everybody has things that happen to them that could bring them down, and I think that our responsibility to each other is to try and bring ourselves together to help. And I think there's something really amazing. I love this country and I love being American, but there's something amazing about the fact that we're living in one of the richest cities in the world, and there's people sleeping on the streets or families in cars. It's the dark side of capitalism, I think, and the dark side of our society, which is because we're so successful and we work so hard. I don't know how exactly we create a space to also have that feel for society and for taking care of everybody. I mean, I think that's sort of the shame.
The challenge of making space for folks to understand all of the factors that go into allowing a person to show up as they understand themselves to be their very best. Comes to question. When you haven't brushed your teeth, when you haven't had a mirror to look in to adjust your hair, when you find yourself having to keep watch over all of your worldly possessions for fear that they may be either taken by someone else or that you could become the subject of an unfortunate sting, whether it be by law enforcement wanting to clear out an area, or others who just may be hostile to your being. Fear, uncertainty, hopelessness, depression, anxiety, all of these factors, all of these experiences easily become part of your life journey. The threat of constantly being on the move, being unable to know that there is a place for me to be, rocks, I believe, an important part of the core of what it means to be human. Again, I believe that is to know and be known, to love and be loved, to know that there are others who exist in this world who are concerned about my plight. And so to make space to understand just how challenging that can be, assaulting to people's human dignity, complicating for their ability to maintain good mental health, financial stability. All of these factors are closely linked and come under threat every day when you live your life with all of what you are and all of what you have on the go. I think that we have a responsibility today to pause long enough and ask ourselves the question, how can I cultivate relationships with some of the most marginal members of my community? And then hearing their story, learn a little bit more about my own. And in doing so, begin to imagine how I can be a part of breaking cycles of poverty and marginality, how I can be a part of helping someone build a firm foundation for being. Now starts and is enriched by relationships.
The MRI brain research of Dr. Harrison Fisk has shown that when members of the general population perceive an individual without a home, a mental process takes place in a completely different part of their brain than if they were to see a housed individual. According to the doctor's research, the homeless are seen as objects of disgust because of a constellation of characteristics they exhibit. These include chronic homelessness, lack of health and wellness care, mental illness, starvation, dishevelment, and filthiness. When we begin to alter how we see the people who are experiencing homelessness, we will ultimately begin to grow as a society. There are so many ways to become involved in ending homelessness. Identifying your own prejudice, donating money or other resources, volunteering your time, contacting your representatives, talking to friends and family about these issues, voting for a politician who believes in the cause, acknowledging the problem and their historical context, and not ignoring the homeless you pass by.
All of us need a home. We were created for each other. We were created for community. And we were created to know that there is a place for, literally a place for us in this world. How dare we not work? How dare we not advocate? How dare we not live in a way that allows everybody to not only have a house, a roof over their head, but to indeed have a home, where a place where folks are known, where they know, where they can have a life and not just exist, and where they can, in their being, help us continue to transform the world for good. Because that's what having a home does. Hey, we cannot be who we need to be if you're not at the table. And in inviting folks to the table, we saw the transformation of so many lives, so many people from countless walks, countless parts of the imaginable human experience. And from there, the programming that has placed Glide on the map, so to speak, in some communities, was birthed out of these many commitments to ordinary resurrections, right? To meeting people where they are and imagining how we can participate in offering life. So the Meals program, which is one of our higher touch programs, got its start as a potluck with just 50 people or so. And now we serve upwards of 800, 900,000 meals a year. The recovery circles started as opportunities for community members to come in and tell their stories and imagine how, in showing up and being vulnerable, that they could receive the support required in order to gain control over their lives. And the Women's Center, for which we have, and children's programmings, so many other opportunities for engaging the community come alive because ordinary people sought to understand that who they were at their very best was extraordinary, and to make it their business to partner with other people to participate in helping to turn the world upside down for good with a little love.
His name is Officer Robert Anderson, just retired from the San Mateo Police Department. Spent 30 years with the police department. Was a police explorer, and then went to San Jose State and became a police officer. And he was, for about 10 years, the San Mateo downtown officer. I mean, his beat was like an 8-block area here. And he told me every day was Groundhog Day, because there was about 30 individuals that he had to see, either arrest them, take them to an emergency room, explain to the merchants that he won't be laying in your doorway anymore. Don't worry, he won't be shoplifting from you anymore. You know, stop selling him beer, and just over and over and over. And one day this hotel that we're sitting in was coming up for sale, and it's been here since 1896. And it was a run-down, dilapidated, SRO, single room occupancy hotel. And he had a thought, why don't we house these people? So he got together a group of stakeholders, some faith-based nonprofits, some nonprofits like Shelter Network that are involved in homelessness, got the county mental health, county AOD, obviously the San Mateo Police Department, and they all sat down and said, what do we do? And they just picked the best, well, not the best, the ones that needed the most help. And slowly and surely they got them all housed. And he's an interesting man. His his claim to fame is kind of, one of these people asked me to be their best man at their wedding. One lady did pass away upstairs, and he was the next of kin. And he prides himself in this. Not how many people I arrested, I reduced crime. He's big claim to fame is these homeless people that he helped in a compassionate way. And so he's quite man, and he's still, to this day, even though he's retired, him and I meet twice a month for lunch, and he comes here to all our events, all the Christmas parties and the barbecues and the Police Appreciation Day. He is here with everyone, still has a vested interest in everyone that lives here. So yeah, I could go on all day about Robert. It's obviously he's just not a cop. He obviously looked at life a little bit differently and solved a problem that was a community problem. And before he started the homeless outreach team, the Downtown Merchants Association said homelessness was by far their biggest problem. We don't even make the list anymore. It's graffiti or people selling stuff, or parking, not even on the list anymore. In fact, these people have assimilated into the downtown. They're loved now. Instead of panhandling in front of Pete's, they're going in and buying a cup of coffee. They all know there's Mr. Evans, and he's buying a cup of coffee instead of begging for it. All because of one cop said, hey, I've got a different way of looking at this.
The thing that's really cool about the homeless prenatal program is that it's a community environment, and it really is about bringing people together. And when you see, all these women come for our, we do the Centering Pregnancy program, so they get their prenatal care, and they sort of form a group and get to know each other, and then they also take classes preparing for having their kids and what the parenting is going to be like. And at the end of the series of classes, they have a baby shower, and you just see all these people coming together. And then there's all these volunteers who come in, and they get into it, like making quilts or doing these beautiful diaper bags and stuff. And a lot of the people who work at the homeless prenatal program were homeless at one time in their life. And most people, if they weren't homeless, they've had personal struggles that brought them to a place where they felt like they survived and they really wanted to give back. So it's a place that's very much aligned with sort of my value and how I feel about the work that we do.
I have one gentleman, I met him, the retired Officer Anderson, as we were interviewing him. He threw up on Officer Anderson's leg. And I did finally, within 2 days, got him shelter. We still didn't think that worked. I kind of made a deal with him if he could stay sober and get along with people in a shelter, because this is a really rough individual, came from Boston, tattooed up, meth head, lost his teeth, really rough character. And he did the 3 months at our local shelter, and we got him in here. And he was a little like, oh, okay, this is great. He wasn't really catching. The best part is, when I gave him keys to a mailbox, he just started bawling. And this is a tough individual that once you get a key to a mailbox, it's something he can't remember ever having. And he's back with his daughters now. Could flash forward like 3 years later. The mayor of San Mateo, Jack Matthews, some big speech, says we don't have a homeless problem in San Mateo, and we used to have a large one. So it's dramatically changed the city, and what a nice way to look on a city that they didn't just send their police force in or move them, go to Burlingame, go to Belmont. Said no, let's take care of our citizens. Just because they're disenfranchised doesn't mean they're not one of the city's best. And again, now they're integrated into the city. And the fact that the Downtown Merchants Association on their cleanups, they started doing it 2 years ago. We do it every year. It's coming up in about a month. We're like the superstars, not the Rotary Club or the bank. It's here comes the Vendome. So the city gets excited when they see that people that were laying in front of their store now sitting next to the bank cleaning up. It's wonderful. And there's a big barbecue afterwards, and they're sitting with the city leaders, the most disenfranchised population, now sitting with city leaders having a barbecue. Just because one cop said, hey, why don't we just house them? Let's look at that.
And the truth is, poverty costs people who have jobs money. That if we get people out of poverty, it doesn't cost us as much. And we haven't figured that out yet. But poverty can be really expensive, not just to those who are in poverty, but people who have wealth, it costs. As I think about the penal system and the amount of money we put to run the prisons compared with the $8,000 that's set aside annually for education, it just doesn't compute. And I'm talking, this is probably at best second grade math. That $200,000 versus $8,000, this is a lot of money to spend. Why wouldn't we spend here? We're not talking about anything brilliant here. The fact that we're not doing this speaks volumes, that we really do need to have a conversation.
There was a study done exactly about this place by Dr. Greenberg and Officer Robert Anderson, showing how much money is actually being saved. The police contacts alone, I think Officer Anderson used to have 3 police contacts a day with this group of people. Now it's like 0.2 a month that the police are actually contacting these people. Emergency room visits went from like 1 a day with this population down to like 2 a month. Well, excuse me, more like 2 a year. Because they now have primary care doctors. They now are, getting checkups. Before, years before they would, until they go to the emergency room, that they would get checked up.
If you could challenge the viewer of this documentary to something, what would you?
There's probably 3 things that I would do. That I would want the viewer to take an honest, deep look at U.S. history. The ugly history that's ours. We need to own that because it's still in the way. So the history of racism, the history of the poor treatment of the mentally ill, mistreatment of the mentally ill, the history of not owning our responsibilities and not trying to atone for those, the lack of integrity and honesty, the ugly history that is a part of the United States. Doesn't mean there's not some good things, but I'm amazed at my graduate students who don't know American history, and that's in their way of some growth. So the first thing is get to know a full notion of history. Secondly, then look yourself in the mirror and who are you? What do you represent? Do you represent what America's supposed to be about or what it actually is? If it's supposed to be about something, then you would end up responding differently. That this is the land of the free. Doesn't mean of some folks. That is not what that phrase said. There's nothing in there about not the land of some of the free, or the people who live in Detroit free, or the wealthy free. It is the land of the free. And there's a bunch of words like that. Either strike them from those documents and indicate those documents are a hoax, or begin to respect them and live them. I put forth some energy to grow. Be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of the impact on your progeny. That you may be able to ignore some things that are right in front of you. But is that the world you want your kids to come up in? Do you want them to have information? Do you want them to be better people? And if so, we got to start doing things differently. And then have some conversations. Have some conversations with your family, with people at work. Take some stands to make this country great. Because the potential's there. And I don't mean great again the way that Trump's talking about, because that smacks of racism to me. But I'm talking about it in a much broader sense to make this country great. That is, that we begin to live what it is we say we're about. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that, and those sort of things. Just be aware of what that's about. So I would challenge you to look at your everyday activities. What do you represent? How much food are you wasting daily? When you look at the garbage, how much are you throwing away? Could you do better than that? Could you take that food, instead of buying so much and not using it, could you donate it? Could you find some places where you consistently get food to people? Could you take a stand on housing? Could you take a stand when police confront the mentally ill on the street? Being mentally ill should not be a death sentence, but it is in the United States. We have to do better than that. We're going to have to take a long, hard look at the violence that's perpetrated towards the mentally ill. Now, granted, there's some things they do among themselves also, but that is an excuse what the authorities are doing, the higher order people are supposed to be doing. And I guess in a nutshell, I mean, start living your life a bit differently. Get in touch with some things and make some commitments open your eyes, stop denying, engage. Because to me, that's kind of what the country is about.